Many people today spend their lives in a desperate search for happiness, for pleasure, for fun. Many people in our society are simply bored. They mope around fantasizing about some secret joy that lies out there somewhere. "I'm looking for adventure and excitement and beautiful women," said the young man to his father as he was leaving home, "and don't you try to stop me." "Who wants to stop you?" said the father. "I want to go with you." But the ironic thing about seeking such pleasure is how little joy it actually brings. In fact, those who seek it the hardest are often among the most unhappy of people. A good biblical example of this is found in the first 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes. In these chapters, it's Solomon, a man celebrated for his wisdom, and he tells of his search to find happiness. And the first words we encounter when we open this book are these: "Meaningless, meaningless," says the teacher, "utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless." You might remember a couple weeks ago I said that the theologian Paul Tillich said that the greatest fear of our time is meaninglessness. Well, Solomon was the wisest man in his time, and yet he couldn't make sense out of life. He was not a happy man, though he sought diligently for happiness. First, he thought he'd find happiness in intellectual pursuits. I mean, who can argue with that? There is certain nobility in seeking knowledge. We salute folks when they're the brightest in their field. But that doesn't mean they're happy or even content. Certainly Solomon was not. He writes, "I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me, but I learned this is only chasing of the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief." Interesting, isn't it? The more knowledge, the more grief. Well, when knowledge and wisdom didn't bring him happiness, Solomon turned to a different path, sensual pleasure. And then he says to himself, "Come, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also ended up without meaning. "Laughter," he says cynically, "is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish?" Then he tried the path of alcohol. "I tried cheering myself with wine," he writes. But then he writes in 1 Proverbs, "Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise." I mean, how can that be? People look so happy in the beer commercials. But alcohol didn't do it for Solomon. Then he turned to more constructive activities. He says, "I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of trees under heaven." But still, Solomon did not find the satisfaction that his heart hungered for. From that, Solomon turns to the accumulation of wealth. He said, "I bought male and female slaves. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and the provinces." Still, he did not find what he was seeking. Then he tried sex. He said, I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delight of a man's heart. 1,000 wives and concubines still left him unfulfilled. Solomon lived large, larger than anyone who had come before him. He said, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart in pleasure. His pleasure-seeking experiments were summed up in these words. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing of the wind. Nothing is gained under the sun. Solomon was a sad and a miserable man. He had everything in life that in his time life could offer. And he counted it all vanity. He had everything that the human heart could desire except one thing. I'll let you guess what that is. We'll talk about it later. But as I read this litany of despair, I couldn't help but see people that I know today who are chasing happiness in similar ways. Knowledge and alcohol and sensual pleasure and work and accumulation of wealth and sex. Who wants to stop you, said the father. I want to go with you. The Apostle Paul saw the emptiness in many people in his time as well, even among the early Christian believers. And so he writes this, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise but wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery, but instead be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms and hymns and songs of the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. Always give thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. There are two keys here that St. Paul gives us that are keys to happiness. First one is this: be smart with your life. Be then careful in how you live, he writes. Not as unwise, but as wise. Now he says that drinking wine might lead to debauchery. I'm not too worried about debauchery with most of you. But alcohol abuse is still a problem in our society, from college campuses to retirement communities. It's a problem on our roads today. It's a primary factor, if not the primary factor, for the tragic causes of domestic abuse. Today we can add opioids and other addictions to King Solomon's list. But Paul says, be careful then how you live. That's good advice. It could be applied to all the substances we put in our bodies, but also to the unwise situations we place ourselves in. If he were saying it today, Paul might say, just don't be stupid. There are many people involved in behaviors that are dangerous to their health, dangerous to their marriages, dangerous to their reputations, some of them dangerous to their immortal souls. Friends, there is a difference between right and wrong, no matter what people say, and every sensible person knows it. If it's in any way hurtful to you or to someone else, it's wrong. If it keeps you from fulfilling your potential as a follower of Jesus Christ, keep your distance. If it causes you to feel ashamed when you look into the mirror, stay away. Don't do anything dumb. Now, of course, the problem is that within our very nature, There's something hardwired in us that makes us prone to doing things that are dumb. There was a scam a few years ago, several years ago, that took place in New York City where some con men decided to make extra cash based on the corrupt nature of people. They got a pile of cardboard boxes, some newspapers, some stickers that said factory sealed. They got a roll of bubble plastic and a stack of stolen shopping bags from Macy's. They stuffed each box with bricks and newspapers till it weighed a couple of pounds, wrapped everything in bubble wrap, and affixed on it the stickers. And then at rush hour at the Holland Tunnel, these con artists would go from curb to curb carrying these bogus boxes in Macy's shopping bags. And when they spotted a potential buyer stranded in traffic, they'd walk up to his window and try to make a fast cash deal. "Hey man, I got a Sony Handycam here. I just got it off a FedEx truck." And he lifts up the bag. He says, "Macy's sells them for $9.99. But I'll sell it to you for 99 bucks. The cars start to move forward. Other drivers are yelling. The thief finally says, "Okay, man, listen. You can have it for 45 bucks. Take it or leave it." And the driver takes it, knowing it's hot merchandise. And when asked later how they felt ripping people off, selling them empty boxes, one of the guys justified his actions. It was in the paper. He said, "Hey, I'm not beating an honest man. No one buys something hot unless they've got larceny in their heart." I admit the guy's got a point. The fellow who grabbed the box and sped off in the night was just as guilty as the thief on the street. And his money gave hearty approval to the one who ripped him off. Happens all the time. The details change, but the depravity's always the same. And no one's immune, not you or me. In fact, the possibilities of appealing to our old nature are endless. I've said this before, we don't use the word sin much anymore. And yet our basic nature hasn't changed much since the time of Adam. So suffice it to say, don't do anything stupid. If it smells wrong, it usually is. Be careful then how you live, says the apostle. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. And then Paul ends it. He says, instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and songs of the Spirit. Sing, make music from your heart to the Lord, and always give thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. I can't imagine a more wholesome approach to life than the one that Paul describes here. I love watching musicians like Rebecca, who love what they're doing. I love watching our children as they sing a song of faith here in church. Paul is describing people who are joyfully singing from their hearts. Why? Because they are filled with a unique sense of gratitude for all of their blessings from God. Now, some of us, at Christmas time, especially me, we'll go to Netflix and we'll pull up the classic White Christmas, with Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye. And one of the beloved songs by Irving Berlin is this one. You know it. When I am troubled and cannot sleep, I count my blessings instead of sheep, and I fall asleep counting my blessings. Still the best formula I know for a good night's sleep. It might sound trite, but as I get older and I hopefully get wiser, it's humility and gratitude that are the traits that I am the most impressed with, that I think are the most important things for us to live with. The happiest people I know are those who are filled with gratitude. They might not be materially blessed, or have exceptional health, or have kids with, straight teeth and straight A's. But it simply means that they have learned to count the blessings they do have, and have learned to say thank you. I read in a Christian devotional of a woman named Haley Bartholomew, an Australian woman, who was very depressed and down. She had an envious life, had three lovely children, a good marriage, but she was disappointed in her life, so she decided to do something. And she started meeting with a nun who counseled her to take time every day to look for something around her, something that would make her grateful for the gift of life. And she was a photographer. And she started a program she called 365 Grateful. She started taking pictures of things that made her grateful, and she did it every day. And it didn't take long for her outlook on life to be transformed. For example, when she initiated this practice, she didn't think her husband was very romantic. But this view changed as she took a photograph of him serving dinner. And for the first time since they'd gotten married, she noticed that her husband always gave her the largest piece of pie. It was his gentle way of showing his affection. Then there are her kids. The joy and happiness she saw on their faces while they played made her grateful to be a mother. Before, she thought being a mother was boring. But now that she took photographs of her children holding out their hands to her as they playfully explored their world, she discovered a lot of joy and wonder in her world. Through the acts of gratitude, Haley found herself lifted out of her rut and celebrating life. G.K. Chesterton wrote, "The test of all happiness is gratitude." The test of all happiness is gratitude. I think he's right. We go back to Solomon, who experienced every earthly pleasure, and yet something was missing. He was a miserable person. And you know now, or you can probably guess now, what was missing from his life. He never learned how to say thank you. Even though he had a mountain of what others would count as blessings, he didn't have what he needed the most. He didn't have a grateful heart. And I hope that you and I don't make the same mistake. Paul writes, "Be careful then how you live, not as unwise but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. Always give thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of His Son, our Lord Jesus Christ." You want to be a disciple? You want to be a witness? You want to be a growing, mature follower of Christ? Then be very careful then how you live. And be grateful. Amen.